So health, for me, health means freedom. I think that everybody says if you have your health, you have everything, and I used to hear that a lot when I was growing up, and I never quite understood it until I was actually sitting in that hospital bed, and everything was potentially stripped away from me at that one moment without me actually doing anything to cause it. Right? So if we're healthy, we have the ability to take on anything that we desire, and we have the ability not only for ourselves to make an impact in our own lives, but if we're healthy, we have the ability to impact so many other people. And it doesn't have to be on such a grand scale. We don't have to be, the influencer or the Dr. Oz of the world. There's a place for that, but it means just talking to one person and actually changing their life.
You're listening to the Live Life Longer show with Dan Voss, inspiring you to live longer through the cold, the hot, breathing, eating, and being nature. In this week's episode, my guest is Craig Kasper. Craig was born into the world of 1970s television and music. In the 1980s, he embedded himself into the hardcore, skate, and freestyle bike culture and broke his arm in half in the process, literally. He has an awesome scar on his arm to prove it. In the 1990s, Craig followed a path to become a scientist and a clinician, earning a master's degree from the University at Buffalo, a doctorate from the University of Florida, and completing his clinical fellowship at Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center in New York City. Craig exited the 90s with less of his pancreas intact and received lifelong lessons on surviving and thriving. In the 2000s, he created a few businesses and shared his message of health on every major television network and media outlet. Since 2008, Craig has been in private practice in New York City. Clinically, he focuses his time on vestibular balance assessment and balance optimization. Ever since his life with type 1 diabetes started in 1999, Craig has dedicated himself to the ongoing personal journey of health, mind, body, and breath, and how it all contributes to building a meaningful life. Craig has also launched Rebellion with Cause, Creative Studios, and the Bravest Podcast to understand what motivates each of us to flip the switch and modify our behavior for the better. The ultimate goal is to educate, empower, and help others create the most optimal version of themselves, regardless of what might fall across their path. Craig, welcome to the Live Life Longer show.
Hey, Dan, thank you so much for having me. That was a really kind intro. A lot of that stuff I've forgotten about throughout the years, but I really appreciate you sharing all that stuff. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to our conversation, and I find your story fascinating. I think we're going to get into that a little bit further, of you living with type 1 diabetes and some other health challenges, and your journey of discovering what health means to you, living a healthier life, and empowering other people to make positive changes in their health and their lifestyles. So with that being said, maybe you can give us a little bit more background on some of that health history that you've had with type 1 diabetes and living with those health challenges.
Sure, I appreciate the opportunity to share that aspect, because it really is an important part of my life. It's really defined at least the past 20 or so years. So I was a young clinician coming back to New York City, working in a major hospital center, seeing patients on a day-to-day basis, kind of living my dream at that point. Moved in with my then girlfriend at the time in Manhattan, and just living the life. And one day I ended up having, ironically, because I deal with hearing and balance related issues, but although I specialize in balance related issues now, one day I had a sudden onset hearing loss in one of my ears, which it's pretty common. And the reason why I tell this story is because a lot of people might ignore their symptoms. So I had a sudden onset hearing loss. I knew what to do. I went to one of my colleagues, and the standard treatment for that, it's believed that it could be a viral incident. So standard treatment is dexamethasone, a pretty powerful steroid, which has kind of come into the public eye, especially with COVID. It's the kind of steroid of choice now for COVID, and an antiviral medication. So started taking steroids, started taking antivirals, started on that course. And then within a course of about, I don't know, 4 days or so, I thought I was losing my vision as well. I ended up having what was called a central serous retinopathy, which is a leak under the retina. And the ophthalmologist at Columbia asked me what I did for a living, and I explained I worked in the hospital. And the reason why he asked me that question was because those types of injuries are usually seen in people who have very high stress types of jobs, lawyers, bankers, etc. But the reason why that occurred with me, they believe, is because of the steroid. It created such a stress response in my system, which, well, I'm sure we're going to talk about breathwork and meditation as we go through this. But I was under an immense amount of stress. And now, coming from a guy who, at that time, I'm 6'2", I was about 205 pounds. I was in really good shape, eating very healthy at the time, working out constantly. This was before biohacking was a thing. I was just staying healthy. And for someone to start experiencing these types of health issues was, I don't know, it was foreign to me. I never really had anything outside of, as you mentioned before, completely breaking my arm in half. I didn't have any real health issues. So I kind of dealt with the leak under the retina. They told me that it needed time to heal. The hearing loss ended up resolving itself over the course of a couple of weeks. But what had happened shortly after the leak under the retina was a period of time where I started to lose weight rapidly. And it wasn't by choice. I actually lost about 30 pounds over the course of a month, despite the fact that I was eating like I was a linebacker. I was still working out. I thought it was stress. I had just gotten married. This is now October of that year. I had just gotten married in June that year. And moved apartments, moved my office to another area of the hospital. I thought it was stress. And it wasn't until I started to hallucinate on the subway platform going to work one morning that I thought something was up. So, look, I have a very high tolerance for pain. I always did. And characteristic male, I don't like going to doctors. I also was of the mindset that I had been through a lot already. I did not want to go through anything else or identify anything else. But that morning on the subway platform actually opened my eyes in many respects. So I ended up testing my blood that morning. My colleague called me about 1 o'clock that afternoon, urged me to get to the emergency room because my blood sugars were over 800 at that point. Just for reference, I know that you speak quite a bit about, at least you had a recent podcast about CGMs and blood sugars, but normal blood sugar range is anywhere between 80 and 120. That's where we hover. That's where our body keeps itself in a state of balance. My blood sugars were over 800. And as a result, it was starting to shut down. You start to go into something called ketoacidosis. It can actually start to impact your central nervous system, your brain. You can go into a coma. Your organs can fail. So I was admitted to the hospital, and that was the start of a very long and current journey on a path to trying to live the best life that I possibly can, despite having this diagnosis.
Wow. And that was, how long ago was that?
That was in 1999. So it was November of 1999.
Okay. And that was after, was that right around developing type 1 diabetes, or when was the type 1 diabetes?
Well, that was the catalyst. So the dexamethasone, type 1 diabetes, for listeners who might not necessarily know the difference, diabetes comes in many different flavors. There's type 2, which is typically found, although we're seeing it in younger people now, it's typically found older person, has been eating poorly their entire lives, is pretty sedentary, and they develop what's called insulin resistance. So their pancreas is still functioning. They pump out insulin, but their cells are not able to accept basically the doors to the cells cannot be opened by the insulin because they're just flooded with fat and other things. So you become insulin resistant. So your blood sugars rise as a result of that. With type 1, it's actually an autoimmune condition which shuts down your pancreas, specifically the beta cells in your pancreas, so you don't have the ability to produce your own insulin. So for someone with type 1, such as myself, you have to supplement with what's called exogenous insulin, meaning we have to inject ourselves pretty much every day, whether that's through a syringe or many people use an insulin pump. So what happened in my case, what they believe, is that I was probably genetically predisposed to type 1 diabetes. It was in my system. And then there's an environmental trigger. And in this case, the trigger was either the virus that caused my hearing loss and or the dexamethasone, which it was likely both, in my opinion. There's no way I'll ever know, and I really don't spend much time thinking about it, to be honest with you. But that was the trigger. So it was that November that I was officially diagnosed with type 1 diabetes.
Wow. So what are some of the challenges over the years that you faced living with type 1 diabetes? What are some of the things that maybe someone else that's listening right now that has type 1 diabetes can relate to?
Yeah, there are so many challenges, but I don't know if they're necessarily much different than the challenges that someone who's non-diabetic faces. If I could bring it back just to provide some source of kind of a foundation for what I'm about to say. I was in the hospital for about a week during that November period of time when I was first diagnosed. And I remember that evening having kind of a come to terms with myself in the bed. And I'm sure that many people experience this, but this is my experience, where I sat there and I had an opportunity to go one of two directions. I could go real dark. I can feel depressed. I can feel sorry for myself. I can say, this is the end of the line. I'm going to live with this horrible, horrible disease for the rest of my life. Or, which is the second path, which is the one that I chose, was to flip my baseball hat on backwards, get myself out of bed, carry the IV pole with me instead of rolling it around the floor, and get myself on a path to saying that this is going to be used as an opportunity versus an obstacle. So that said, there are obstacles. Some of the key ones that I face on a day-to-day basis, which anyone with type 1 might deal with, is control of our blood sugar. We have to act as our own nutritionists, our own endocrinologists. We have to think like a pancreas. And there's a wonderful book that's actually called Think Like a Pancreas. But we have to be our own medical team. Because as wonderful as the medical system is, and as well-meaning as a lot of professionals are, if they're not type 1, they don't quite understand 100% what you're going through. So managing blood sugars, especially one of the challenges I face is sleeping. I go hypoglycemic every night all the time. And that's frustrating because you do not get a good night's sleep. And we all know, especially when we're talking about living life long and healthy, sleep is a critical pillar there. So that's one of the major things that I encounter is hypoglycemia, whether it's in the middle of the night or if I'm exercising. I love to cycle now. I ride 30, 40, 50 miles at a pop now. And I've always competed. I've run races, endurance races, not long distances, but, endurance races up mountains and half marathons and all these different things. The challenge we face is managing our blood sugar when we're doing those things. For me personally, that is the most frustrating part of living with type 1 diabetes, is that I don't have control of that sometimes. And you don't know what direction your blood sugars are going in.
Sure. So I got to be honest, I don't know much about hypoglycemia. What are some things that you like to do to maybe help you sleep a little bit better or fall asleep faster? Are there certain things that you can do to kind of offset what's happening there with hypoglycemia and affecting your sleep?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So there's so many different elements that impact our blood sugars. And I look at it as basically a foundation for things that affect us in life as well. But things that can affect your blood sugars, if you're stressed out, your blood sugars can go high. Sometimes they can actually go low. It really depends on the individual's body. Everybody's different. It's kind of like once you've met one type 1 diabetic, you've met one type 1 diabetic. Because everybody has their different elements that impact their blood sugars. Sleep, alcohol is a big issue. I'm not a big drinker, but I see if I have a glass of wine, a beer or two, in the middle of the night, my blood sugars will trend lower. So I really try hard not to drink, if at all, which in all honesty, I don't miss it at all. I haven't really had much to drink over the past 20 or so years anyway. It's just a healthier way to live. Eating specific foods before I head to bed. Now, this might not necessarily jive with someone who's in the keto world where you want, or if you're in the world of intermittent fasting, where you have windows of time where you just don't eat. For me, I don't know if I could ever do that just because of my need to manage blood sugars. So for instance, if I eat something that's super high carb with very little fat before I go to bed, my blood sugars will spike, but somewhere in the middle of the night, they'll drop off and they'll go low on me. So it's a matter of eating things higher in fiber, more whole foods, adding a little bit of fat. So my favorite meal before I go to bed is an apple with almond butter. I see that gets me through the night. And the reality is if for some reason I do go low, I have, and we could talk about this as much as you like, I have a continuous glucose monitor that I've used for the past 7 or so years, and it alerts me. So it'll give me an understanding if I'm starting to go low. And if I do, I have pure glucose tabs by my bedside, and that helps me bring those blood sugars right back up.
Super interesting. Yeah, I was just going to get into a CGM, and I appreciate you. I think you said you maybe checked out that episode with Dr. Casey Means about continuous glucose monitoring, and I would like to hear maybe a little bit more about your experience with using continuous glucose monitoring over the years, what that's been like for you, and if anyone that's listening that is new to it, what they might need to know on just kind of a basic level.
Yeah, sure. So CGMs have been around for a while, and I think that from a perspective of someone who has diabetes, it's probably one of the most important technological advances that we've seen. It would be great to be able to cure type 1 diabetes, which hopefully one day we'll get there. And there's really interesting science around the area of encapsulated islet cells and implantable types of things. But those are still a little ways off. But CGM's been with us for a long time. I've used the CGM, as I said, for about 6-7 years or so. And there's some initial hurdles that you face. And I think that they're becoming less now because we're starting to see CGMs used for non-diabetic uses. So for instance, as you were having your conversation with the good doctor from, I think the company's called Level, correct?
Mm-hmm. Levels,
yeah,
yep.
Levels, which is just a really interesting application. So more and more people are using wearables, but when I started using it, there was a psychological component to it. It's like, do I want people to see I have type 1? Do I want them to ask me questions what this thing is? So ultimately, once I quickly got over that hurdle because I realized that if I had the ability to look at my blood sugars on a minute-by-minute basis, and most of these CGMs will record your blood sugars and provide you with a reading about every 5 minutes. And the difference between that and for someone with type 1 who's concerned about either hyperglycemia, blood sugars being too high, or hypoglycemia, blood sugars being too low, the difference between having a piece of information every 5 minutes versus a finger stick, which just gives you a picture in a very limited period of time. It's just for that one period of time. The trends are the most important component here. So what a CGM allows you to do is actually monitor your trends over time. You get to see what certain types of foods do to your blood sugars, what emotional state does to your blood sugars, what exercise can do to your blood sugars, what alcohol does to your blood sugars, what anything does to your blood sugar, which is invaluable information for anybody, but especially for someone with type 1. So for me, it's been a sense of stress relief, because when you are dealing with the unknown minute by minute, give you the example of exercising. If I'm out running or if I'm out riding 30, 35 miles, I know my blood sugars are typically going to go down because of the amount of energy that I'm expending, but I don't know how fast. And I don't know where I'm at any one moment without the CGM. With the CGM, I can make decisions on the fly. I can fuel up, I can stop, I can pop some glucose tabs. Or if I'm going too high, okay, I'm good for now. Let's just push it a little bit harder maybe. So it's invaluable information. So for me, the exercise part and the sleep part too, as I mentioned before, the CGM has been critical for my success.
Yeah, it's a remarkable technology that I'm learning more about. And for someone like yourself that lives with type 1 diabetes, I see it likely as a game changer from what I hear from you. And it's relatively new technology, right? It's not like it's been around for decades. How far back are we talking here where it like really kind of came to the forefront of medicine?
Right now, I think that it's starting to see this peak. We saw Super Bowl ads for Dexcom with Nick Jonas, and you're starting to see companies like Levels, which it looks very much like one of the other CGMs that are out there. So you're having multiple players in the industry with different philosophies of how to collect blood sugars and present it to the person. At the beginning, it was because it's an expensive technology also. It's not something that everybody can have. And this is something I'd love to do at some point, because I think, as you said, it's a game changer for people with type 1. And a lot of families just cannot afford CGMs. And for a parent with someone who has, for a parent of a child who has type 1, they're up all hours of the night, hoping that their child doesn't go low in the middle of the night and fall into some sort of altered state of consciousness because their blood sugars are too low. So it would be awesome at some point. I've had this thought, and I'd like to do this at some point, is to try to raise funds for some sort of support for those families. But so it's much more widespread now. I think that more insurance companies are starting to cover it, but the challenge is that it's still really expensive, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where we go with that. And I think it's definitely a noble cause and something that you're thinking about. Obviously, it's on the minds of many people, many parents, many families that just simply can't afford it. So I too hope that we make good progress with the affordability of it. I'd like to go over to kind of the mindset of things. I know you talked about a bit about mindset. Let's take, you back to the hospital bed in 1999 when you, like you said, you first realized this is a disease you're going to be living with the rest of your life, and you can either feel sorry for yourself or you can take the situation and take it as is and overcome that challenge with proper mindset. So what are some things that you like to do, just whether it's with the health concerns that you faced in the past, or just continuing the health journey that you're on today, or just the regular stress that we all face every single day, all of the challenges that we have thrown at us on a daily basis? What are some things that you like to incorporate to make sure you are in the right frame of mind, you have that mindset kind of down pat, and you can lead your life with intention?
That's such a wonderful question, because I think it really serves as the core for all of us, really, is where our mind is at any one period in time, specifically when we face challenge. I was lucky to a certain extent, because when I was in graduate school, I started to recognize the fact that stress was something that impacted me in a very serious way. Studying for graduate school tests and doing research projects and dealing with life and all of that had a tendency to kind of unravel me. And it took me, a good 20 years or so to recognize that. So I, without realizing it, fell into meditation, which now this is back in 1995, 94, 95 maybe, where it was as simple as just sitting in a dark room, focusing on my breathing. And for some reason, I started to do that every single night. I had no exposure to meditation. I had heard about it. I was really focused on neuroscience when I was in grad school. So I understood, the brain a little bit. I understood the stress response. I understood fight or flight. And for some reason, this just worked for me. So it was just a complete, beautiful, I just happened to come across it. So fast forward years later, when I was in that hospital bed, I honestly believe that all of the work that I had put in for those many years before it, 4 years, that actually helped to train my brain to be able to deal with that intense situation. I've always been one who I don't do great when there's like soft stressors. But when there's serious, intense stuff that's going on around me, I have a tendency to get very quiet and very focused and very intentional. And I don't know if that's a trait, if that's nature, right? Or if it's the meditation necessarily, and the mindfulness component. But then I really dove very heavily into mindfulness at that point. I started reading, I don't know if you've ever read Herbert Benson's book. He's a physician, was a cardiologist at Harvard, and he wrote this wonderful book back in the 70s called the Relaxation Response. It's really the foundation for a lot of the science that people are doing nowadays. So he talked about the relaxation response, which is the exact opposite of of the stress response. If you haven't picked it up, it's interesting because
I'm gonna have to check it out. I haven't heard of it.
I always have it on my desk.
Love it.
Because it's just an ever-present reminder of the foundations of things for me. And from there, it went into Jon Kabat-Zinn's work, because as a scientist, as someone who was in the healthcare industry, I always wanted evidence-based stuff. And at that point, meditation mindfulness was still very mystical. It was still yogi sitting up in a cave somewhere in the Himalayas. But what Jon Kabat-Zinn did for me was he actually took science and did peer-reviewed research on people who had psoriasis and showed how they had the ability to, through mindfulness and light therapy, the mindfulness actually helped them heal their psoriasis better than those who didn't practice mindfulness. So at that point, there was a huge kind of a lighthouse for me, because type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune condition. I said, well, what can this do for type 1? So as a result of that, I just really dove pretty heavily into mindfulness and looking at the brain and looking how it can help me. And it's been a wonderful journey, and I learn every day something new. So It's never ending.
Yeah, I equally appreciate it and enjoy it. And I think it shines light, everything you said there, shines light on how much stress plays into things like autoimmune disease, and having extra stress, unwanted or unneeded stress, just amplifies all of those challenges that we face when you have an autoimmune disease, like psoriasis or type 1. But aside from that, I find meditation or just practicing mindfulness during the day to be so beneficial for me, and especially in today's world where there's constant noise, right? Like the TV's always on. You might have the news on. We're always on our phones, right? We're scrolling through social media. We're getting pinged into this and that, and we got emails coming in left and right. And it seems like we just have this constant mental stimulation. And for me lately, so I've been practicing meditation probably for the last 5 or 6 years. I'm not as consistent as I would like to be, but I try to do it almost every day. And for me, it's just that realization that we're always tending to different things and different people, and like I said, all of that noise. And I think it's super powerful for people to learn how to sit in silence, right? To sit in a room by themselves and not have any distractions, not have anybody bothering them. You learn a lot about yourself, really, and that's kind of been my experience.
100%. I think that it seems so easy, right? But sitting in silence with yourself and with your own thoughts is probably the hardest thing on the planet to do. And the one thing that I've learned through all of that is I've learned a lot about myself, and it's probably the number one tool that I like to use. And it's not a biohacking tool, it's like, it's just being with yourself and understanding who you are, what's important to you. And as you said, the problem that we all face is that there is a constant stream of content coming at us from every single angle. Everybody wants our attention. Everybody wants us to be a certain way. Everybody wants us to buy certain things. Everybody wants us to believe that they are something that they really are not necessarily, more often than not, which is the most frustrating thing about social media, because anybody can be anything they want to be, as long as they build a decent enough following where you have people who actually have something to say, and they don't have a huge following necessarily, and they are the most important people to listen to, including ourselves. And as going back to that, it's like just going back and listening to your own voice and being able to actually find that time and continuing to work on it. There's never any way to perfect it, which is the beautiful thing also. It's a nonstop effort just to get yourself to be calm and quiet, and to be a part of something greater than yourself, really.
Yeah, and in addition to mindfulness and meditation, another thing I love, and I know you have a shared interest, is breathwork. Can you maybe talk us through some of the physiology and psychology of breathwork, how maybe you incorporate breathwork into your daily routine, into your lifestyle, and how it helps us, because we were talking about stress, right? How things like autoimmune disease, stress is not good when you have something like that. So how can breath maybe help reduce stress in your life?
Well, I think what I've learned, and I would say that there are many other people who are much more qualified experts than I am on this topic, although I have a fair amount of experience, personal experience, and I'll speak from my personal experience. Look, the breath is known as, the breath has the ability to control our brain, basically, and our brain has the ability to control our breath. It's a beautiful kind of intertwined system. So if you take a look at how I use it every single day, it's part of my meditation right now, although there are some components of breath work that I pull out of my meditation. So the simplest form of meditation is just following your breath, period. And if you lose the ability to focus on that, just jump right back into it. That's the process of meditation. That's driving home and carving those neural connections in your brain over and over and over again, so you have a learned response of focus. So that's one of my key uses of the breath, I would say, every single day. On a separate component or an additional component that I might use, I'm a real big believer in something called CO2 tolerance. I am really interested in breath holds and building CO2 tolerance, specifically for the reason that when you are sitting there and you think you cannot hold your breath any longer, you know you can. It's just your brain telling you, we're in some sort of a state that we need help. We need to open our mouth. We need to take a deep breath. But CO2 tolerance is a really interesting way to build resilience, mental resilience, not only physical resilience, but mental resilience. So I love incorporating CO2 tolerance into my, it's probably not every day, but a few times a week I'll do that as well. Those are the two major forms of breath work that I'll use. Now, when we talk about using the breath to control our physiology, I love examples of when somebody is super stressed, and I see patients on a regular basis who I will actually go through these exercises with. Dizziness, which I deal with every day with patients, is massively stress, anxiety producing. We feel out of control. We feel like we're going to fall. We feel like we might hurt ourselves. We might pass out. Are we having a heart attack? Am I having a stroke? All of these things go through our mind. So there are times when I'm doing some evaluations on patients where they'll actually feel dizzy, where it's my job to make sure that they're comfortable, but get the information I need. So you can visibly see their chest, and we don't see their mouths anymore because everybody's wearing masks, unfortunately. But you know their mouth is open, which is the worst way to breathe. And you can see their chest just bouncing with the air coming in and out. And they're taking these super shallow chest breaths, which is the worst thing to do when you're in a state of anxiety, because that actually tells your brain that you are in trouble. So by telling patients, look, focus on breathing through your nose. Simple count. I want you to breathe in through your belly. I have them physically put their hand on their chest, physically put their hand on their belly. I want you to breathe with your diaphragm. I want you to breathe in through your belly. Breathe in for a count of 3 or 4, and I'll count them. Hold, pause. I never say hold, because hold means, holding breath. That's an anxiety-producing sound word as well. Pause, and then we exhale for 6 or 8. Doubling the output has been scientifically shown to actually, over the course of just a minute or two, completely reduce that stress and fight or flight response. So, yeah. So that long-winded answer. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You touched on so many good things there. That exercise of breathing in, I do like a count of 4 on the breath in, and then 6 or 8 on the breath on the exhale. I like to practice that before bed if I'm having a hard time falling asleep. I don't know the science behind it, but it sounds like you probably know a little bit more. But it really works if you do that for a few minutes, and all of a sudden I'm just knocked out.
Yeah, it's the breath. It really has the ability to control where your brain is going, one direction or the other. Look at the exact opposite of the relaxation response, the stress response. So there's a number of different breath techniques, and look, pranayama has been around for centuries, and different indigenous cultures have used the breath in many different ways. But certain breath techniques have the ability to actually ramp us up. Without mentioning names or anything like that, but these hyperventilation types of techniques do the exact opposite. Now, for someone like me with type 1, I don't necessarily partake in those types of breath techniques because my job is I don't want to increase my blood sugars. And because if I'm in a state of fight or flight or stress, it's ultimately going to raise my cortisol levels. It's going to raise my glucose levels in my blood, and my blood sugars go up, right? So I'm really more focused on the other side, trying to initiate and recruit the parasympathetic side of things versus the sympathetic side of things. There's a place for both. If you're an athlete, if you need to get going, sympathetic is awesome. For me, I don't focus too much on that side.
Interesting. Yeah, for me, I'm a big fan of the Wim Hof method. Been doing that for about a year, and you mentioned before about responding to stress. I now notice just my ability to control my response to certain situations, specifically with my breath work or just breathing. I don't necessarily always like to call it breath work, but just noticing my breath, slowing it down, taking a deep inhale in, deep exhale out. And there's certain situations where years prior, I would have reacted very differently, right? If somebody ticks me off, I might have kind of barked back at them. Or if I'm driving, known to have a little bit of road rage, laying on the horn, screaming at somebody because they cut me off. Now I'm just like, okay, take a deep breath, exhale, right? Like you said, inhale, pause, exhale, and then you can move on with your day. You don't have to let these little things freak you out like they would before for me. So it's been that has been a game changer in my life as well.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting because it's all about awareness, really. And it dovetails so nicely with type 1, and what I deal with on a day-to-day basis is developing that awareness over the course of time and sharpening the tip of the spear, right? Just constantly just working at it and just developing the awareness of your body, of your mind. Think about how many people are just like kind of roaming around this world and just have completely no concept of their physical body, their mental state. And I hate the concept of awakening, right? But it's like you have to become more awake and aware if you want to accomplish anything in this life. But it starts with, as you said, if you were kind of laying on the horn, right? And it stuck with you all day long. The person who cuts you off does not care the fact that you're still stressed out. But we tell ourselves these stories over and over and over and over again, and then brain plasticity kicks in, and then we keep focusing on the negative. It's just this horrible downward spiral where with the breath, for me and for you, it seems like as well, it just kind of put the brakes on that, and then it turns the spiral around, and then you start to focus on more of the positive things.
Definitely. There is a viral video I came across this past week on Instagram. It was a 6-year-old boy with his little brother, who was probably a few years younger, like 3 or 4 years old. And the younger brother was having, you could probably describe it as a panic attack of some sort. He was hysterically crying. I'm not sure what the situation was, but uncontrollably just like, crying and kind of losing his breath and all that. And his brother was standing there right, with him and told him, stop, take a deep breath in, breathe with me, breathe in and breathe out. And he did that. And then the younger brother just like totally was able to regroup and move on with his day. It's really cool to see these two kids, 6-year-old and I think like a 3 or 4-year-old, to have that insight at such a young age and have that ability to control their emotions through breathing. Was really fascinating to see.
That's so beautiful. When you think about that, you talk about impact, right? That 6-year-old learned it from some adult, probably. And I'm always a big believer, and especially with my kids, is you have to lead by example. They don't care what you say. They watch what you do. So somewhere along the line, that 6-year-old saw mom, dad, teacher, somebody doing that and thought enough of it to keep it in his memory bank, and then applied it to someone that he cared about, which is such a beautiful transition of power there, right?
It is. It really is. That's super cool. We've covered a lot here. We both have a shared interest in, between, your story of your health journey and breathwork and mindfulness. We've talked about the word biohacking a few times. It's something I'm interested in, especially from like the tech side of things and wearables and tracking data. But it doesn't necessarily always have to be a physical product that you wear, right? In general, what are some things that we maybe haven't covered in terms of health optimization that you have found to be really helpful in your health journey and your lifestyle?
That's such a big question.
The loaded one.
Yeah. Look, tech clearly plays a huge role in my day to day. I don't know if this is going to be a popular statement right now. I'm not a biohacker, right? I don't consider myself a biohacker. I consider myself, bio-aware, right?
I like that.
I think that the most important thing is that all of these tools, let's talk about the tech for a second that I use. The purpose of the tools, as we've said, I think is to develop awareness. But the problem is that we have the ability to be so wedded to some of these tools that we lose our own innate awareness of what's going on with our bodies. So I think the beauty of the technology, whether it's, wearable bands that look at heart rate variability, which I used for a period of time, continuous glucose monitors, if you're not type 1 or type 2, and you're using it for other purposes of tracking nutrition and what it does to your blood sugars, they're all beautiful things to do, but to use them for a period of time, learn from the information that they give you, and then put them away. Once we become too dependent on them when we don't need them, we lose awareness, I think. I think Brian McKenzie, I don't know if you're familiar with Brian McKenzie's work, but I think he wrote a book on this a few years ago about listening to yourself again and kind of getting back to the nature of things, which I'm a huge fan of. Nature's been a big focus of mine over the past year. So using the tools for a period of time, learning what you can, and then making sure you don't lose your own innate awareness of it. But some of the things that I like to do are pretty simple. The foods that I eat I consider that bio-aware, biohacking is nothing that has many ingredients on the label. Just eat as whole food as possible. I love things like raw cacao. Antioxidants are off the charts. I love goji berries. I love hemp seed because it provides me just a little boost of plant protein. Put it in yogurt or wherever. I love looking at those superfoods and how to incorporate them into my diet. I'm a big believer in just eating lots of greens and salads. I am not, although I did for a period of time put away the meat and the chicken, and I only ate fish for about a year and a half. I found that I personally needed some red meat in my diet, so I incorporated it slowly. I still don't eat chicken, and it's probably more of an ethical thing for me just because I saw how chickens were harvested, for lack of a better word. But I think diet is something that we all have to be super mindful of and find what works for us. There's no one diet that is perfect for every single person. You have to experiment a little bit. That's where those tools might come into play as well. Sleep is the biggest biohack ever. And it's hard for me sometimes, and it's challenging, and I know when I don't get a good night's sleep how it's going to impact me. But sleep is the most important thing, I think, out of anything for us.
I'm so happy you mentioned everything you shared there, because we are living in a world where there's new advancements on that tech side every day, it seems like. And that can be exciting, and it has its uses. But I think sometimes we get away from what they're meant to do, which is optimize our health and help us live in a healthier, natural way. And for me, I'm getting more into some of those natural hacks that we all have available to us, right? It's optimizing your sleep. It's focusing on better nutrition, whole foods, getting outside, being in nature. I'm a big fan of things like grounding and forest bathing, just spending a few hours with no technology, no phone, just go out and go for a hike, or whatever nature is to you. Things like relationships, right? That societal aspect, especially in the world of COVID, where we've, experienced lockdowns for the last year, and we're all kind of getting sick of Zoom calls. And I think now that things are starting to open up a bit and we have some light at the end of the tunnel, I'm seeing people that are enjoying, after getting their vaccine, seeing their niece that they've never met before, that was born a year ago, or seeing their grandparents that they weren't able to see for all of this time. Those are things that we need, right? We're social creatures, and there's something there about having that human interaction and having those relationships that are nourished. It's really big, I think.
I agree 100%. I think that look, we're tribal. We're a tribal species, and for the past year, we have done the best that we possibly can to facilitate those relationships through technological means. But it worked, and we're very lucky that we have all the technology that we have. Otherwise, we would have been completely isolated. And I think about the mental health issues that we're going to see coming out of this for adults, especially for children. But as we're coming out of this, I think you're right. We are starving for human contact. We're starving to see people face to face and get in community again. I love the aspect of nature that you brought up also, because that's something that I find myself, as I get older, starting to want more and more. I'm getting drawn to being outside more and more. Unfortunately, where I am in New York, I think you're in Chicago area, right?
I'm in Chicago, yep.
Yeah, so winters are pretty brutal for both of us. But as soon as we can, just getting outside and just being in nature, that's what we're meant to do, really. We're not meant to be in boxes. We're not meant to sit in front of glowing screens all the time. So,
yeah, one of my favorite times of the year is right around now, where it starts warming up a bit, and you can go outside. You don't have to have your big winter coat on and your hat and gloves and be all bundled up. You can go out with either a lighter jacket or take the jacket off, and you can just feel that sunshine hitting your skin, and it just feels so good. You're just craving that after 2, 3, 4 months of cold, dark winter.
Although the winter is very good for cold therapy. So if you, instead of jumping into an ice bath, you just go outside in your short and t-shirts for a bit.
Right.
A la winter.
Well, that's what I've been doing the last month. I've been going over to Lake Michigan, which is just 10 minutes down the road for me, and doing cold plunges.
Awesome.
Incorporating the Wim Hof method. And that goes back to, right, the natural biohacks. I love ice baths and cold showers. I do almost every day, but use what we have that Mother Nature has given us, right? You can have a lake or a pond or river to get some of that cold exposure.
Yep, 100%.
That's great. What else would you like to share about some of the work that you're doing? You have an awesome podcast that I've checked out and have been enjoying. Do you want to maybe share a little bit more about the Bravest Podcast, some of the guests that you've had on, and then as well Rebelling with Cause? I'll give you the floor to share more about that.
I appreciate that. Yeah, so the podcast has been around for about 3.5 years or so, and I'll do it when I can. I'm a pretty busy clinician, but it's a passion project for me, and it's something that I feel is important for me to share. I find myself as a frustrated creative at times, but what I did with the podcast, the goal of the podcast was to basically highlight people who are dealing with initially type 1 diabetes, who've overcome what seems like insurmountable obstacles, and they're ordinary people just like you and me, to go on to do extraordinary things and then impact many other people along the way without really setting out to do that necessarily, but just by virtue of the fact that they did something pretty incredible. So I'll give you an example. I've had guests on type 1 who have run the toughest endurance races on the planet. For instance, the Marathon des Sables, which is across the Sahara. Same individual ended up running this Arctic challenge and winning across the Arctic, carrying all of his own supplies in frigid temperatures. He actually ran it twice. The first time he didn't finish because he came short of the finish line. The second time he ended up finishing pretty well. Type 1s who've climbed Mount Everest. Type 1s who've run literally across the United States and Canada. One of my buddies, he is a founder of a nonprofit organization called the Diabetes Sports Project, which he just ran, which is pretty remarkable. The World Marathon Challenge, it's called. 7 marathons, 7 continents, 7 days. Type 1. So these are people who set out just from a personal perspective to prove to themselves that they can do something. And then ultimately their message, I love the story. And being able to share that story and being able to share it with listeners who might be type 1, who have children with type 1 or have nothing to do with the type 1 community. I have guests on, for instance, professional football players, professional basketball players who've played in Super Bowls, who've played with LeBron James, who've had severe to profound hearing loss since they were born. So it's not just about type 1. It's about obstacles, overcoming them, and basically influencing and inspiring people just to get up, even if that means walking around the block. It's nothing is insurmountable. So that's where the podcast comes from. That's Rebellion with Cause is just kind of the creative umbrella over all of that. And we're actually, if you don't mind if I give a quick plug, we're actually doing a ride. My younger son and I organized a ride in support of the Diabetes Sports Project, where myself, about 10 or 11 other cyclists are going to be circling Manhattan this May 8th to raise some money. So if anybody's interested, if you want to learn more about that, you can go over to thebravestlife.com, and then there's all the podcasts on there. There's information about me. There's information about the ride. And if you really want to donate to help a good cause, that would be awesome as well.
That's awesome. That sounds really cool. Yeah, the podcast I've been enjoying. I've only had a chance to check out a few episodes because we've met, I think we met maybe a month ago. But I will definitely be going back and listening to some more of your guests because it looks like you have a really great list of people there.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, and you have your website you mentioned. You're on social as well. Did you want to share your social profiles there too?
Yeah, sure. On Instagram, it's at Craig Kasper, CraigKasper. On YouTube, it's Craig Kasper as well. We're starting to put new videos up there as well. And those are pretty much the main platforms that I'm on. I'm on Clubhouse as well. I find Clubhouse to be really an interesting social experiment right now.
It is.
I'm not quite sure how it's going to shake out necessarily because it's getting to the point where we talked about the noise. It's so noisy. Yep.
It is.
They have to figure out a way on that platform to be able to make it easier to find your tribe and sift through all the garbage.
I agree.
But it's interesting. I think it'll be around. I'm not a futurist necessarily, but it's an interesting experiment. So I'm on there too if you guys want to check it out.
That's cool. I do find it a good way to connect with people, like-minded people. But I also agree that it's very noisy and there's just so much content. There's a lot of people that are joining every day, tons of rooms, and it's like it's hard to find your specific tribe. Whereas I felt like when I first joined this first few weeks, it was a lot easier.
Yeah.
I don't know if the algorithm picked up on it, and then all of a sudden, I feel like now I go in and it's just like rooms on all kinds of topics that I am sort of interested in, but not really. They're not even health related. So either way, it's a cool app that I'm having fun with, but we'll see where it goes.
No doubt.
Awesome. My last question for you, Craig, that I have for you is, what does health mean to you? And then I guess it's twofold. So the first piece is, what does health mean to you? Second piece is, who do you want to impact the most with your work? So
health, for me, health means freedom. I think that, everybody says if you have your health, you have everything. And I used to hear that a lot when I was growing up, and I never quite understood it until I was actually sitting in that hospital bed and everything was potentially stripped away from me at that one moment without me actually doing anything to cause it, right? So if we're healthy, we have the ability to take on anything that we desire, and we have the ability not only for ourselves to make an impact in our own lives, but if we're healthy, we have the ability to impact so many other people. And it doesn't have to be on such a grand scale. We don't have to be, the influencer or the Dr. Oz of the world. There's a place for that, but it means just talking to one person and actually changing their life. And that was my goal with the podcast, was if one person listened to this story and it made an impact in their life, it was totally worth it. There's no money in podcasting, right? at least for the majority of us. It was really about just, how do I talk to that one person? So for me, health is freedom and the ability to ultimately help others.
Yeah, I love that.
Which leads to your second question, which is, who do I hope to impact? I'm always a big fan of the underdog. I'm a fan of the person who doesn't think that they have a shot, that feels that the cards are stacked against them, that the world is kind of coming down on them. And it might be real. There might be some real challenges that we face. And we've all faced collective challenges, especially over the past 12 months or so, some harder than others. And I think that the message that has to go out there is that we have an obligation to help others, period. And whoever wants to listen to me speak, whoever wants to send me questions, I'm always there to actually serve as a helping professional. I'm a healthcare provider. That's just my nature. I have developed a ton of empathy throughout the years. I've developed a ton of focus in certain areas, and I have knowledge. I'm further down the path than many people. I also have people who are further down the path from me that I learned from, but there are people listening to us right now that have not heard any of the things that we're talking about. Those are the people that we hope to make an impact in their lives. And that's ultimately my goal, is whoever's on the path behind me, let's help them get up to speed, and let's help them get on to a point where they can actually not fear taking a chance.
Wow. Craig, that was so good, man. You have me on like the edge of my seat here. I'm standing, but you still have me on the edge of my my feet, I should say. That's so good. Just to add to all of that, I think the first piece in terms of, living healthier and really making sure you have that nailed down, that for me has been the biggest thing in my life that I've changed in the last year or so, to make sure that I'm taking care of my health. And this sounds kind of cheesy, but I feel like since I've accomplished that, and it's never really accomplished, it's always a journey. You're always trying to improve. But in terms of improving my nutrition, exercising more, getting better sleep, just doing some of the things that seem like basics, I feel like I'm almost like I have a superpower now, where I can go out and do anything. I can, achieve my goals. I can be more productive. I can have more impact in the world. I can have better relationships. And it all starts with getting that first piece down of optimizing your health. And then that second piece there of the underdog, I think that's a big piece that sometimes gets missed in the greater, broader health world, especially when you start looking at people that are influencers or celebrity doctors. And that's great. Like you said, there's a place for that. But I think sometimes that underdog gets missed. And we all know, especially I think COVID has shined light on that, of how collectively, and I don't mean this to be negative, but how collectively unhealthy we are as a nation. I think it's been a good wake-up call for all of us. And I do think there are a lot of people out there that feel hopeless. They feel like they're stuck. They don't know where to go. They're getting conflicting advice. And they're looking for people like you that can give them some inspiration, can give them that nudge that they need, and that glimmer of hope. So I appreciate everything that you said, everything that you're doing. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just, I don't know. We put our heads down and we do what we feel passionate about every day. But I appreciate the recognition. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and
Absolutely.
talk to your listeners as well. This has been a real privilege. And as we said before we hit record, it's always a good opportunity to actually speak about the things that are constantly just floating in your mind. And it comes together, and good things happen when you actually have these conversations. So
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Awesome, Craig. Thanks so much for your time. Hope you have a great day.
My pleasure. You too, man.